Hey guys, today we'll be covering a 2021 drama film called I. At the start of the movie, we see the main character Ah Young, who is fixing her broken washing machine. Young grew up in an orphanage until she had to move out due to her age. She now shares a small apartment with her orphanage friend, Min Ji. One day, Young receives a letter at her door stating that she won't be able to receive her orphan benefits anymore. The following day, she goes to the authorities to plead her case, but to no avail. So she now has to fend for herself by working part-time jobs. In the next scene, we see Young, who majors in childhood education, in her class presenting her assignment. After school, she goes to a restaurant pleading for a part-time job, but sadly the owner turns her down. Later that night, as Young browses through her laptop in search of a job, she is interrupted by some of her orphanage friends that Minji has invited over for the night. Young is annoyed with one of her friends, Kyung-soo, who owes her money, but she doesn't say anything. After a while, Kyung-soo enters the room to borrow a charger, but when he notices Young looking for a job, he promises to find her one. In the next scene, all the friends are seated together in Minji's room and they play a game together. During their game, they mention Aunt Young-mi. We learn from their conversation that Aunt Young-mi used to be their former orphanage director, but now they don't keep in touch with her for some reason. A while later, Kyung-soo suggests a babysitting job for Young. Having no other option, she agrees to take the job. The movie then cuts to the scene where Young arrives at Bing Chae-ee's house. Bing is a single mother, and her son Hayuk is the one who requires babysitting. Once inside, she asks Young for her ID card and then asks her to change Hayuk's diaper. As she has experience with taking care of small children at the orphanage, Young easily completes the task. In the following scene, we learn that Bing has hired Young. She shows the new babysitter around the kitchen, explaining Hayuk's eating schedule. Bing also shows her a yellow pacifier for Hayuk in case he cries non-stop at night. After this, she heads off to work. Next, we see that Young is acing the babysitting tasks. But just then, the infant starts puking over her shoulder. When Young informs Bing about this, she tells her not to worry as her son's puking is normal. She also insists Young not call her over such trivial matters and handle such matters herself. At her work, Bing sits alone looking at her phone. It turns out that she works as a stripper in a strip club. The manager, who also happens to be Bing's friend, walks in and tells her to dress accordingly so that she gets picked. She then forcibly takes Bing to buy a new dress. Meanwhile, Young tucks Hayuk into bed and completes her assignment before falling asleep on the couch. Her sleep is interrupted by Bing, who comes home drunk. Bing pays Young $50 for the day and quickly puts herself to bed. The following day, Young is in her classroom where her professor is talking about the ideal age for a child to attend daycare. After school, she goes to Bing's place and plays with Hayuk. While Bing is blow-drying her hair in the main bedroom, her phone rings. The call is from a contact named Bitch. Bing immediately storms out of her room and grabs her phone, but suspiciously ignores the call. Then she, along with Young, put Hayuk in a stroller and go to the park for some fresh air. After spending some time in the park, Bing heads off to work while Young returns home with Hayuk. At the door, she is approached by a woman who tries to get close to the infant. Young becomes defensive, but the woman insists she call Bing or else she will report Bing for leaving her baby to work at a strip club. Although Young is taken aback by the revelation, she makes the call. Soon after, Bing arrives at her house and tells the woman to leave her alone. However, the latter keeps on pestering Bing about the money she owes her and also threatens to report it to the police. Bing reveals that the woman herself does illegal work of selling babies, so the police would also take her in. Grabbing a knife, she then scares the woman away from her house. Later that night, Bing reveals that she pretended to sell Hayuk to the woman from earlier, but ran away with the money instead. Young is shocked that her employer is broke and going through a financial crisis too. The following day at home, Young and her friend are once again having a problem with their washing machine. They try to fix it themselves as they cannot afford a repairman. Meanwhile, at her work, Bing is called upon by her manager, who insists she go back to her baby and take care of him instead of catering to men. However, Bing exclaims that she has to make money to fend for herself and the baby. Before she leaves work, one of her clients, who happens to be a lawyer, introduces himself to her and kindly offers his business card in case she needs help. Later that evening, Bing and Young along with Hayuk go for a walk and tour around Young's campus. Bing reveals that she used to be a good student and shows her interest in taking a class someday. They then end their evening by eating dinner at a local eatery. Shortly after, Young returns to her apartment, but she is approached by a bruised and battered Kyung-soo in the street. Once again, he begs Young for money, but she is only disgusted at seeing him in such a condition. Kyung-soo then asks if Young can ask Aunt Jung-ming for help. Frustrated, she shouts that the aunt left them because of jerks like him, who always caused trouble and asked for money. She then leaves him on the street and goes to her room. The following day on campus, the headmistress asks where Young will be doing her internship. When she doesn't reply for a while, the mistress suggests a daycare facility where she can intern for a month. Meanwhile, Bing is stressed since she cannot settle a fussy Hayuk. She tries every method known to her to stop him from crying, but to no avail. Thankfully, Young arrives and is able to soothe the infant, who even calls her mommy. Bing is frustrated that her own son doesn't recognize her. To make matters worse, Young reveals that she cannot babysit Hayuk for a month due to her internship. Later that night, Bing goes back to her work hoping to attract a man. However, she only gets age shamed for being too old to be a stripper. Upset and angry at the same time, Bing thinks a date with the lawyer from earlier would ease her mind. In the next scene, we see Bing and the lawyer having drinks together in a restaurant. Meanwhile, Young tucks Hayuk to sleep and carefully closes the crib's safety bar. A while later, Bing returns home to find Young asleep on the couch and Hayuk in his crib. She slowly opens the crib's bar and carries her son, but Hayuk doesn't want to be held. Furious, she puts Hayuk back in the crib and storms out of the house without locking the crib's bar. She then strolls around Young's campus and falls asleep inside one of the classrooms. She awakens after getting a distressed call from Young, who is at the hospital. At the hospital, Bing learns that Hayuk had fallen from his crib and hurt his head. Thankfully, it's nothing serious. However, Bing blames the babysitter for being careless and fires her on the spot. Young says that she is sure she locked the crib's bar before putting Hayuk to sleep, but an annoyed Bing doesn't want to hear any of it. In the following scene, Bing is fuming about the hospital bill being obnoxiously expensive, though she takes care of it from the last of her savings. Determined to earn money, she quickly returns to the strip club, but only to get yelled at by the manager, who wants her to look after her baby instead. Realizing her pitiful state, the manager suggests Bing sue the babysitter, Young, and make money out of the settlement. Bing initially doesn't like the idea, but when she is back at home trying to look after Hayuk, who only wails all day, she finally gives in. She breaks down for a while before deciding to appeal to her lawyer friend in helping her out. In the next scene, Young is called into the same lawyer's office and informed that Bing is suing her for hurting her baby. Shocked, Young claims it wasn't her fault. She then goes out looking for Bing, but doesn't find her at her apartment. A little while later, Young arrives at the strip club, but the manager informs her that Bing doesn't work there anymore. Angry, Young quickly calls the police to report the illegal business. She even threatens to keep on informing the police unless the manager reveals Bing's current location. Later, we learn that Bing is busy taking a nail art class. She practices on one of the clients, but gets interrupted by a phone call. It is the same woman from earlier who sells children to other people. Once outside the class, the woman insists Bing sign an agreement. We learn that Bing is selling Hayuk to the woman, who will then sell the baby to another family. Later that evening, Bing drives to the woman's place and waits outside for her. She sits, taking him in, as she sees her baby one last time. The woman arrives at the gate and takes Hayuk inside, while Bing breaks down, confused about whether she made the right decision. She then drives off and attempts to take her own life by turning off her car lights and driving into the darkness. She loses control and crashes the car. Meanwhile, Young has started her internship at the daycare that her headmistress suggested. But as she is busy with her work, she gets interrupted by a call. In the following scene, Young arrives at the hospital to find an injured Bing and her manager. The manager was the one who called Young earlier, hoping she will take care of Bing, who has to be in a wheelchair for some time. Young is devastated by the incident, but when she asks about little Hayuk, Bing tries to avoid the question. However, Young is determined to know whether Hayuk is safe, so she continues to question Bing. The latter finally reveals that she sold him off and that his head injury was also her fault. Hearing this, Young is enraged, prompting her to berate her former employer before taking off. Later that night, Young gets a call from Min-ji to come over to Kyung-soo's house. When she arrives there, she hears the devastating news. Kyung-soo has taken his own life, but his friends refuse to believe it. Since Kyung-soo is an orphan with no guardian, his friends won't be able to provide a proper funeral for him. Learning this, Young and the other friends sobbingly plead with the authorities to hand over Kyung-soo's body so that they can give him a proper burial, but their plea only falls on deaf ears. The following day, Young returns to the hospital and asks Bing for her phone, hoping that she can find out about Hyuk's whereabouts. She fears that the infant could end up in an orphanage and have a hard time growing up just like she and her friends did. Fortunately, when Bing goes to the bathroom, Young goes through her phone and retrieves the number of the woman who sold babies. The next day, Young spies on the woman and gets into her house to find Hayuk there in the bedroom. She quickly grabs him and tries to sneak past the woman, but unfortunately gets caught. The woman stops her and threatens her with a knife, hurting Young in the process. Despite this, she refuses to let go of the baby, and when Hayuk calls her mommy, the woman becomes emotional and reluctantly lets them go. Following this, Young rushes to Bing's manager's place, where Bing is also currently staying. Upon learning that Young has brought her child back, Bing scolds her and tells her to return Hayek. She fears that keeping her child will only do more harm than good to him. She is afraid that when Hayek grows up, he will be ashamed of his mother who works as a stripper. Young tells her that she shouldn't care what others say, as some children have it worse. Hearing this, Bing angrily grabs her son and takes him away, only to hold him tightly and cry in the corner. Realizing that her former employer is scared about raising her son, Young promises that she will help her take care of Hayek. In the final scene of the movie, we see the manager, Bing, and Young, together with Hayek, dancing happily to karaoke. They might have a lot of problems in life, but despite their dire circumstances, they know how to enjoy the little moments. The movie ends with them sharing dinner together as a family.